button. Here we go. With no further ado, on behalf of Access to Innovation, thank you so much, Professor, for taking your time being with us today. Usually we go with the 20-25 minutes presentation, and there's a Q&A session following. As always, you're more than welcome to put in whatever questions you have in the chat, and I'll try to facilitate the conversation following. We spent usually 3/4 of an hour, so to the point presentation and questions are really key to what we're doing here. And should there be interest in picking up on the conversation following, of course, from Access to Innovation side, we'll be honored to continue that. So without any further ado, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, colleagues, for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. The Access to Innovation is something that appeals to me because I taught innovation and development at the United Nations University for 6 years in Maastricht. And for most of my life at the UN, 20 years, I was dealing with issues of industrialization and innovation. So happy to really join you. Abike, yeah, please put it back the slides. So you asked me to speak, and I'm going to keep to the 20 minutes, 25. The ideas of special economic zones. This model actually is based on the idea of clustering and agglomeration of farms within specific geographic space. Now, I'll speak to 3 or 4 sub-themes here: the current situation with the SAPZ, as we call it, the 1 or 2 case studies, and then I will give you a brief introduction on the rollout plan that we have for those who will be interested in joining us in this journey. Now, what is the current situation in Africa, and why are we doing this? Next slide. I just use one example. For almost every commodity, this is what you find. Now, when you, 60 years ago, in 1960, for example, if you look at the nominal price of cotton and you compare with the real price, what you find for those producers of that raw material is that what they are getting in 1960 and what they are getting in 2020 is almost exactly the same. And this is very consistent. The bank has done a lot of studies to map all of these commodities. In other words, countries that are producing the same quantities of cotton since 1960 probably receive less export revenue today than they did in 1960. So it's not a surprise that all these countries, for the most part, are poor. You go to them and then basically nothing has changed in their life because they are not adding value to their commodities. When you simply specialize in exporting raw materials, you export your jobs and you simply just export your sweat. Next slide. So this is why the second reason also is the yield value on the farms in most of African countries. When you look at the trend, again, in the last 60 years, what you find for Sub-Saharan Africa is that the yield values have changed very, very little until maybe in the last 20 years or so. Look at the trend for East Asia. In other words, for a farmer in East Asia today, and that of course, we didn't even put here Europe, is probably like 5 times that of what you find here. So basically, a farmer today in some local community in Africa, doing the same hours, farming on the same hectarage as a farmer in East Asia is getting 20% of what that farmer will get. And therefore, productivity, of course, is extremely very low. So to sustain itself, to ensure food security, Africa needs to close the yield gap. Next slide. So this is why the special agro-industrial processing zone is extremely important. It's part of what we call the Feed Africa agenda of the Africa Development Bank, which is putting up about $25 billion over the next 10 years. Now, the concept, as I said earlier, is drawn from the cluster approach. And I know it's been used all over Europe, it's been used in Asia and all that. The idea is to have an agro-based spatial development initiative where you concentrate agro-processing activities within a specific geographic area. Say, for example, over 500 hectares or 1,000 hectares, you ensure that you bring companies within the same geographic proximity. Of course, locational proximity doesn't guarantee that companies talk to each other, but that is one step in ensuring that companies talk to each other. It reduces transaction costs. It ensures more, engagement, person-to-person engagement. And of course, it also ensures better information flow. The unique thing, and this is the second point on the screen here, the unique thing about the special agro zone, as different from, say, your normal special economic zone or special export zone, is that the SAPZ is located within the peri-urban area. We deliberately locate them within and close to the rural communities, because that's where the poverty problem is. 70% of all smallholders, farmers in Africa are within those areas. If you don't solve that problem, you are not solving the poverty problem. So basically what we do, and the financing from the bank is to put money into those roads, water, and so forth. And the final point, of course, is to ensure that having done this, we actually facilitate producers, processors to move into those zones. Next slide. So it's an end-to-end solution. You have the farm production side, as I've explained, to raise productivity by ensuring inputs, reaching farmers, fertilizer, improved seeds, and so forth. Ensure higher mechanization, which is lacking in many African countries. Ensure the irrigation so that you can have multiple farming within a year. And of course, climate smart agriculture is becoming extremely important. And to open up the access to both on-site facilities and off-site facilities. Now, one of the innovations for the zones is what we call agricultural transformation centers, where we ensure that within this, go ahead. Let's, so we bring together, I'm going to show more of the ATC soon. So the SAPZ brings together all of this, the industry, the skills, infrastructure, and we ensure also that in the model we're using in the bank, this is going to be private sector-led agriculture. Why? Because we want to incentivize more investment, more players into those zones. The support and policy environment of government is going to be very important, but we want to ensure that we have other players into this. So next slide. So this summarizes the agro hub. Basically you have this hub. Now you have about 5 dimensions or 4 dimensions. Here you have to ensure that people live within those communities. You provide hospitality, health centers, schools. Now the agri-transformation centers is made up of cold stores, ripening chambers, warehousing, and so forth. Then you also have the marketing area, terminal markets, admin, buildings, and the one-stop centers, packaging, and so forth. And of course, support services, R&D, libraries, mechanization, repair shop, and so forth. And then, of course, the production side. So the rural transformation centers or agri-transformation centers, it looks like something like this. It's put within those communities, so that farmers and villages within 50, 70 kilometers are served by these ATCs, so that they can bring their product. So we provide them with farm credit, agri-clinics, food, entertainment, and so forth. Next slide. Now, so what are the key goals of the SAPZ? Number 1 is to enhance productivity. As we said earlier, increase yield through use of modern technologies, improve seeds, reduce post-harvest losses, which is very, very high in most African countries. In fact, in some remote communities, they lose close to 70% of what they produce because they cannot reach the market, because there are no roads, because there's no logistics. Then reduce cost of operations, because when you have proximity to one another, you can also put in what they call common facilities within those communities. And of course, very importantly, increase value addition by using modern processing to increase value to all chain actors, especially farmers and consumers. The key outcome that we seek is, this is not exclusive, is to reduce food import into Africa. It's huge. And at the same time, you find that the estimate from the Africa Development Bank is that by 2030, agribusiness in Africa will be about $1 trillion. But much of it is based on export or import from other countries. So we need to change that narrative, because these countries, most of them don't earn the kind of foreign exchange that will allow them to be importing food. Food security, export, create wealth for rural farming communities, and so forth. Next slide. Yeah, so this summarizes what I've been saying. Basically, these are the functions. We can share this with you. Next slide. Next slide. Now, just to, and I close, just to show you that what we are doing is nothing new. The case studies show here. Next slide, please. Now, when you look at the case of Korea, today, Korea has close to 1,000 industrial parks. Half of them actually are agro-industrial parks. Export from that zone was about $11.6 billion in 2018. 65% of all manufacturing production, 76% of exports, 44% of manufacturing employment comes from those zones. So the theory works, the policy works, it's about implementation. Next slide. I also show Vietnam. I'm showing it because it's a relative newcomer to all of this game. By 2019, they had almost 400 zones. In fact, as at last year, they've added more. And by 2018, the domestic projects in those zones aggregated together was worth close to $42 billion and over 145 billion in terms of total capitalization. And from 5 or 6 processed foods alone, Vietnam earned about $40 billion. This is more than all that Nigeria earns from oil in that same year. So basically, we've been showing this to governments, to policymakers, that it is in their interest to ensure that we succeed with this special agro zone. Next slide. So where are we rolling out? Go on. We are now in 18 countries. This is for the sake of access to innovation and all your partners, those who want to be involved. We welcome participation of businessmen, companies. As I was discussing with my colleague here earlier on, many of the embassies have been expressing interest, many NGOs, private firms. We had a whole load of interest coming. We're in several of the countries that you see here. I mean, of course, they are all at different phases of completion. But this is where we are. We are ready to do business with all our friends, and the bank is ready to support you in information, to work with you, to leverage networks and contacts within all of these countries. Next slide. I think this is probably the last slide. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Very interesting. A few questions from my side just to get going, and then again for the audience, feel free to jump in, raise your hand or throw in a question in the chat, and I'll try to navigate the conversation. Perhaps, I mean, these are a really interesting initiative, and I think it seems to be very well thought through, and it's also documented here based on previous experience from a number of other countries. Of course, there's a few questions popping up if you're coming from the Nordic countries. Of course, you're not coming in as a not necessarily big investor. So where do you see the roles for Nordic countries? Of course, we got Arla, Grundfos, the bigger ones, but majority of the companies here from the Nordics are SMEs. So is there a platform? Is this a platform where we should also interact, and how could you foresee that kind of development?
Oh, thank you very much. These are relative terms. when you talk about SME in Europe, it's probably a big company in Africa somewhere. But of course, we are encouraging SMEs. They are the majority, actually. In most of the zones, you probably find one or two big anchor investors. But the majority are going to be small and medium enterprises. I was telling you earlier, for example, about the case in Nigeria and also two other countries where we have the local development banks have already approached us. For example, the Nigerian Bank of Industry approached us, and we've actually signed a financial agreement with them now for $1 billion over the next 4 years. And that money is to be lent to, they're going to lend it to all the companies that will locate within the zones. So it's for lending at concessional rate, of course. Interest rate in Africa is very different from what you have in the Nordics or in Europe. There are banks that charge you as much as 26%. So a development bank like Bank of Industry is coming in with 7% over the next 8-10 years. And of course, with moratorium of 3-4 years. So that is a big thing for many of these companies. So, and we've been receiving a lot of application, what you call expression of interest. So we are very happy to welcome Nordic companies. So we even have an advantage because you probably come in with a lower, if you have a development bank, say in Sweden or Norway, funding a company to come there at 2% or 1%, you have a huge advantage coming to Cote d'Ivoire, coming to Mali or wherever, or Kenya. So this is really what we are looking for.
Okay. So as such, just to clarify, it is expected that as a private company, you're also coming in with your own financing. So you're providing the infrastructure from where you can build your business. Is that correctly understood? Yeah.
So the bank is facilitating the construction of the infrastructure. We are not alone, actually. IFAD is also providing about $150 million. Islamic Development Bank is providing about $170 million. So actually, the AFDB contribution for the first phase, and I'm talking of the Nigerian one now because it's the one on my mind for next Monday. We are going to the board on Monday. It gives you a flavor of how it plays out in almost every country. We've raised now about $520 million for the Nigerian 8 zones. But in many other countries, it's probably 50 million overall and all that. So all of these countries are looking for investors because the bank is there to de-risk you, to support you with information, with all manner of things. So yes, the money for the bank is mostly borrowed by those governments to put in place the infrastructure, water, energy, optic fiber cable and all of that. And at the end of it, mind you also, it's going to be done by private actors. So once that is done, then the private processors, farmers, just come in, plug and play, as we call it. So that is it. What you take for granted in Europe, for example, that, there's road, there's water, it's not so in many African countries. So this is the intervention that the bank is making and create these geographic zones in a place where we can now turn zones of misery to zones of production. That is really how my president describes it. He said, turn the zones of misery and poverty to zones of production.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I see there, Henrik, you have raised your hand. So word over to you.
Yes, I have. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for the presentation here. I had one question about when we supply equipment and so on. Who are your actual main implementing partner in the different countries and so on? I mean, we spoke a little bit about the different banks and so on, but do you have any other implementing partners within UN NGO or anything like that?
Yeah, no, IFAD is a UN. IFAD is a UN, and we have also UNICEF. In fact, we had a meeting with UNICEF yesterday. They have their U report, which is a platform for dissemination of information, advocacy, and all of them. We've met with so many partners. The UN is a big player. I was in the UN for 20 years, so I'm a UN person. Beyond that, also we have other NGOs, not non-UN NGOs, who are coming in to help with, especially the farming community, organizing cooperatives, and of course also the IT part. That is another very interesting aspect of what we are seeing with the SAPZs. Almost all the major telecom companies are expressing interest to be engaged with, for example, there's a program called the e-wallet that is being run now in most African countries, where you actually just use a telephone, dial 4 numbers, where instead of subsidy going into some middlemen, the subsidy goes straight, the input goes straight to the farmer. The farmer receives a message, and it goes to an agro dealer near that area. For example, the ATCs we are building, part of what we're going to be doing is to ensure that a farmer can go to an agro dealer warehouse and collect his fertilizer, 2 bags, 3 bags, directly, instead of buying from a middleman who will have, jacked up the price and a subsidized price from government. So it's something that Dr. Akinwumi Adesina did when he was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. And they reached at that time 15 million farmers. So we are trying to upscale this. And now, of course, with more modern technology, with AI, we are hoping that this experiment is going to be really huge with the special agro zones all across Africa.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. And again, for those of you who got questions, raise your hand or throw it in the chat. I can see there's a question from Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Professor, for sharing this interesting vision. I think you have actually partly answered my question, but my question is, what are the mechanisms that you are putting in place to try to attract private capital in terms of equity? That is one question. And the other question is also, is there a mechanism for mobilizing micro finance or micro loans?
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much. Let me answer the last one first. The IFAD, for example, they have very well tested approach to dealing with small businesses, as you know very well. That is one of the reasons actually we reached out to them right from the beginning. So one of the models they have used in the past is to put together associations of small micro businesses within those communities. Because as I said earlier, you will never solve the poverty problem until you raise the living standards of these groups of actors. So we are going to be focusing a lot on them. And we're going to also be focusing on young people who don't have huge capital and tracking their trajectory over a number of years to ensure that these actors are within those the micro, small businesses. So whether they're in the farming communities or they're in the processing ecosystem, we are going to be paying very specific attention to them. So IFAD is leading on that with us. And also, we also have a number of the states or the provincial governments involved with ours, because at the end of the day, it's all about locality, involving themselves in cooperatives and all of that. So what the bank is going to be doing is to support those. Now, private equity, we welcome very much. Like I said, the bank can help you to guarantee your risk. This one of the African Development Bank is a AAA rated company, corp bank. This is the leverage we have actually in Africa. We know the continent. We have the leverage. We have the influence, and the bank has the process. In fact, one of the accusations of the bank is that our due diligence process is too strict. So anytime the bank is involved in any of a big project, you find others don't even bother. They just come in with their capital. So this is what we want to leverage with the influence and the convening power that the bank has to attract equity, to attract participation of private sectors.
Right. I see there's another question from Lars Hedam. Word over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Professor, for the presentation. What I wanted to ask you is, a lot of these agri-processors, we see a lot of them being, especially from countries in Europe, being extremely specialized in what they're doing. So take, for example, a abattoir agri-processor, and they're interested in doing exactly what they're doing, slaughtering animals, but all of the auxiliary partners might be missing that. So they're not interested in buying, and they're not interested in selling meat. So what do the AFDB and these SAPZ do to connect these agri-processors who only want to do one thing to people who are interested in and willing, with both capital but also expertise, to connect to the rest of the supply chain?
Oh, thanks a lot. The generic definition of agribusiness, there are the 4 aspects. That's the crops, forestry, livestock, and fisheries. So all of them are, for us, connected. In fact, out of the 8 zones we are doing in Nigeria, 3 of them are actually livestock. They just want to do livestock. I'm sure you know all the fights in Nigeria with headers and all of that. It's all about climate changing, grazing land is shrinking, water is falling short. And so you have all these clashes between people rearing livestock and those farmers. So there are 3 of the states that want to just focus on livestock. And of course, once you focus on that, you are focusing on a whole range of value chain, feed production, chemicals, all manner of things. So yeah, so Lars, to answer your question, once you take a particular item, it sort of generates all manner of forward-backward linkages. So like I said, if you have anyone who is interested in any of these businesses, let us know. We will put you in touch with our role is to put investors and people who are doing stuff in contact and to help them to establish their businesses in those places in a very secure, safe environment. The whole idea is to ensure that businesses go there and they are secure and they can do their business with peace of mind. So, and by the way, most of the zones will be like almost like a gated fence community. It's expensive, but this is one of the comfort, Thomas, you were asking, how do you incentivize people to come into these spaces? You want to guarantee safety, you want to guarantee, and there's another dimension of the huge housing business also will be going on in all of those places. I'll give you an example. The agro zones we are supporting it in Ethiopia. We have 2 or 3 agro processing. Ethiopia now has 24 agro parks. They are probably the most successful of all our RMCs, as we call them, regional member countries. Half of them are actually private zones. And this is another opportunity. You can actually have your own private zone. We will help you to come into a space and you say, look, I just want to build a 500-hectare livestock dairy process. We have some French companies now, for example, in one of the states that are simply building their own dairy farms. So the opportunity is huge. And like I said, the role of the bank is to make sure that you can go there with all the information you require, whether as a private sector investor or as a supporter of or NGO to do your business.
Thank you. That led to another question from Thomas, I can see.
Yeah, my question is in a bit of a different direction. So in establishing all these agriculture zones, I guess you, in some places, come into the challenge of land rights. Has that been a challenge in the different countries? No. Securing the right land rights?
Yeah, well, not what as far as we know now, And I know this debate goes on all over the place about land grab and all of that. What we do is actually bottom-up approach. As I said, we started the process for most of the countries. It takes about 2 years. We approach, say, the state government, and then we walk through with them with the, say, the Minister or Commissioner for Agriculture, Industry, Finance office, and we ask them to identify the top 3 crops and the land and location where they want to have their business. You know, usually it's not a big thing, 500 hectares, 700 hectares, depend on the ambition of those communities. Mostly, this is a land that we actually insist that the state ensure and guarantees that if there's compensation to be paid, it is paid to those communities. But what we find is that most communities are just as anxious to get involved, because for the most part, you find expanse of land doing nothing for the last 100 years. You know, I've been to places where for 50 years there are almost virgin land doing nothing, because they don't have the capital, they don't have access to money, they don't have influence. So they are almost unlike the narrative you find with some NGOs. When you go to these communities, they will be the first to come and tell you, please come and help us. You know, because for the most part, the governments in those areas don't have the capacity to help them. So yes, to answer your question directly, we've not had an issue with land. What we ensure is the equity, to ensure that if someone needs to be compensated, that is correctly done. And of course, the bank insists on that. You know, part of our due diligence, and also insist on a very thorough environmental, social, and impact assessment. It's one of the requirements. You don't go to the board without an SCR, as we call it, environmental and social impact assessment. You don't go to the board without a thorough feasibility study, a business case for those. That's why it has taken us 2 years. We started in April 2019 in some countries until we arrive at this step, this place now. And just to let you know, we are going to be doing the political launching for many of these zones, for Nigeria and 2 others, in first quarter of next year. We'll be inviting you to join. It's going to be a big thing. It's not just to make noise, it's to actually announce this to the world that it's here, and we are, you know, inviting partners to come and invest.
Thank you. Could you perhaps elaborate a bit further? Now we talked a bit about mostly about the private sector, but the engagement also with local community and also local NGOs. Yeah. I can see a number of the NGOs that we're working with are working within the agro-business sector, and that there seems to be some obvious linkages with the local anchoring and the training support to local farming cooperatives and local smallholder farmers. Is that a part of how do you see that interaction between you as the big entity and some of them perhaps smaller NGOs or organizations working in the same territory?
No, we welcome this. As I said, the biggest partner we have now is IFAD, particularly concerning the local community training. Mm-hmm. But we welcome all the help particularly at those levels. It's not an expertise that everyone has, you know, in the same way that you have big companies. Some actually do their CSR, also trying to assist the local. But if we have specialized groups, NGOs who want to help communities, we are very happy to have introduction to them.
Okay. Very interesting. I noted that you're developing the zones also now in Uganda and Uganda and Kenya. There was also already a zone in Tanzania. Uh-huh. I would assume that the COVID situation has put it a bit on hold, but could you talk a bit about the future that you see in the East Africa?
No, you know, each country, like I said, different levels of implementation. The one in Tanzania, we actually started much earlier, and then we had some sort of delay of course, COVID also intervened in 2020, and it hasn't stopped. But what we did, because of the long process, what we did during COVID was to have a Zoom engagement with many of the countries. For example, we needed to have information on the feasibility studies and all of that. So we had several Zoom calls with many of them. So we were able to bridge that gap in time. And then we, of course, resumed physical engagement early this year. So we have a team that went to, because you have several interventions. You had a team that prepares what we call the project concept notes. After that, usually it consists of agri economies, economists, you have environmental people. They all go in a group as a mission. And they spend sometime 1 week, 2 weeks in those communities with government agencies, with communities, hearing directly from them. We organize a lot of focal group discussion. So that report then comes to the bank. And then after that, we have another series of engagements which culminate in what we call the project appraisal report, which is the one we've now taken to the board. It's almost like 70 pages of reports, very dense reports going into all the details to be achieved in every step, and stating the outcomes very clearly. Taking these steps, spending this money, what do you intend to do with it and all that? So, yeah, COVID set us back a bit, but we were able to innovate socially to get around some of it. And so we'll continue to navigate the COVID. I'm not sure it's going anywhere soon. Hopefully it will exhaust itself at some point. But, it was difficult to just stop life because of it. We take all the extreme precautions the protocol requires to do. So, yeah, so in East Africa, we have Tanzania, Kenya, we have Mozambique. Well, that's not directly in. Then in Southern, we have South Africa. We have Botswana doesn't borrow much. They hardly borrow money. Which other countries? So the two big countries in East Africa is Tanzania and Kenya, where we have our special agro-industrial processing zones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thomas, a final question from you.
Yes. When we look at the different agricultural area, you talked earlier about looking at it from a value chain perspective. And I guess in many cases, there would be certain part of the value chain that kind of constitute a bottleneck. So do you do any analysis of the different value chains that is available to private stakeholders so that you can actually see where in the value chain can you add value?
Yeah, actually that is what the feasibility study actually focuses on. It takes, say, cassava, and it in detail analyzes what comes out of cassava: industrial starch, high quality cassava flour, whatever it is. It takes cocoa, what comes out of it, chocolate, whatever it is. And then it subjects, of course, it to all the cost analysis, technical analysis. So yes, the reports contain very detailed value chain analysis of each of the crops that each community identifies. Like I said, we've asked them to identify like 3 or 4 top crops in terms of acreage and all of that. And then beyond that, we then do a business case. In fact, we have the UK FCDO paying for many of the business cases that we're doing, particularly in Nigeria and another country. So that's another set of partners that we have who have gotten involved with it. So yes, it's a requirement for approval. You need to do a value chain. We call it end-to-end solution. So at every point, of course, at every nodal point, you want to identify the challenges, the bottlenecks. Where do you need to put the most effort? Where do you need expertise for each of the crops to seamlessly go into the market? So yes.
Thank you. Now time is running fast, so in principle we got 4 minutes left from this conversation. Professor, could I ask you, I think at least from the side of access to innovation, we'll continue the discussion on how to facilitate the dialogue between the partners that we're working both with in Denmark and also the Nordic countries. But what would be your advice for a way forward if there could be an interest from the private sector, or we also got researchers with us today and the private sector? Well, how do you approach the African development? You're a big organization. So what is the best approach?
No, so you just write to me or to Ms. Sawyer, and then we make it happen. This is what we want. Just a simple expression of interest. And you can also help us to be our advocate with the private sector community, with government, with access to innovation could become a major pillar for us in Denmark and in all the other Nordic countries. So all you need is a simple letter, and then we will provide you with the relevant information on how to go forward. And then, of course, telling us exactly where your area of expertise is, which country is your preference. We can share with you the map so you know exactly where you want to be. And we can also advise based on what you are putting on the table. So please just write to us. We are here. Like I told you, from Monday after the board meeting is for me day number 0. We now want to focus directly on our partners. It's been a long process, paperwork within the bank. But once we are off that, it's about partners, it's about investors, it's about logistics suppliers, about NGOs, about foundations. So this is where we are going to be going from early next year.
Thank you so much. At least from our side, we'll do our best on behalf of the Access to Innovation Network and members to continue this dialogue. In the coming years, there's quite a new round of financing coming out from the European Commission. There's a new development aid policy now getting into action from Danita, and I think there's so many overlaps that we see here. And often we also see that our partners here are looking for, you could say, safe zones and well-placed contextual areas where they can work out from. So there are a number of interesting overlaps. So to the audience, let me know if you think there's an interest in this, and we'll continue the dialogue. And then Professor, once again, thank you so much for taking your time. I think that was highly informative, and looking forward to continue the dialogue. So thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure being with you this morning. I look forward to working with all of you. As I said, we see you now as our major representative in the Nordics. So please feel free, just send me a message and then we will respond to it.
Thank you so much. We'll share the info following. And for the audience today here, of course, we'll continue with the Access to A2i talks in 2022. The next round will be in January, where we're going to focus on the notion of impact financing and what are the opportunities to attract financing to some of the cases that you're working on. I think it could both have an interest to the private sector we're working with, but also NGOs, and in some cases also even to researchers. So we'll, of course, share more info on that following to the new year, but otherwise, all the best to all of you. If I don't see you, enjoy the holidays once you get to it. And thank you so much. Enjoy the weekend.
And thank you. By the way, the Nordics are big shareholders of the bank. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah.
Norway, Sweden, Denmark, big shareholders of the African Development Bank.
Yeah, we'll continue.
So we are in this together.
Okay, it's good to hear. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.